So it's interesting to watch Death Cure and wonder, is this the last big blockbuster dystopian teen movie that we're going to see? Which, considering how massive they were, just taking off in popularity, it's hard to believe, but I feel like Hunger Games is long gone. I feel like, I wouldn't say it fizzled out, but if they tried to do another one with or without Jennifer Lawrence, I think it would bomb. The last Divergent, Allegiant, that was a disaster. We're not going to get another one. So this is really somewhat the last of these kind of movies, potentially for a while, and it's pushed back even farther because of the injury to the lead actor, so it seems even more kind of out of the trends, but I think it was a really good movie, honestly, and if it is kind of the last of these kind of movies, I think it's a fitting end. Now, a lot of people are talking about the length and how bloated this movie feels. I honestly didn't mind it, because I feel like a finale of a trilogy or of a series, you do want it to be bloated to an extent, and I'd rather it be bloated than when they split it into two parts. Some of the worst movies I've seen are those first movies out of the two-part finale. The second to last Hunger Games, the second to last Twilight, just these awful movies. So I'm glad they did this in having a bloated movie instead of trying to split it into two and milk even more money. And while it was bloated, I feel like especially for fans, and there are fans of this series, you do want a big, climactic, bombastic send-off. So I like that more, and I'll be more forgiving of that than a really streamlined, sleek final entry. So what I liked about Death Cure was they really drove home the moral ambiguity that I think is one of the strongest aspects of the series. In the second one, especially if you just view that as a standalone entry, I feel like the kids can come across as a little selfish and a little short-sighted, and if you look at kind of the logical arguments that go back and forth, it doesn't really make sense. They seem kind of just, well, we don't want to be in your experiments, and we don't care if the whole world goes up in flames because we just want to be free and I care about my friends, and they don't come across well. But when, in this one, you actually see a bit more of the experiments and you see these kids almost being tortured, you empathize way more with their position and almost swing back to the other side of the debate where you're like, yeah, it doesn't matter how many lives that it saves, it's wrong to force people into these situations and to inflict fear like this on them. And I think it's really interesting that when you look at an issue like experimenting on animals for research, when you hear the arguments and you hear both sides, rationally you may come down and say, yes, we need to experiment on animals because look at all the people it would save and look at all the potential goods and do kind of pros and cons analysis. But then when you actually look and watch what they do to animals and see it for yourself, suddenly a different kind of reasoning kicks in and this emotions can kick in and you can swing to the other side of the debate. So I think it's just interesting how we have two different ways sometimes of making moral decisions. And there's a lot to like in this movie. The visuals, the mandatory infection check signs, the scrapyard, the rabble of people outside the gates, and you see the guard towers and the guns. A lot of really cool gun designs in this movie. I like the leader of the Cranks and hit the design on his face. I thought it was quite cool. And we get a monster back. We were missing that in the second one. That was a nice touch as well. Some really cool action set pieces with different vehicles. Cool design of the vehicles. I mentioned the guns. There were shock grenades. People getting thrown through glass. Just lots of different things happening. We get the zombies back. And only thing more sinister than zombies is when they're behind transparent plexiglass just slammed on the glass. So lots of good stuff happening. And again, it is bloated, but there's enough there where you never feel like it's a real slog. And Thomas, I think the actor gave a great, very underrated performance. Now, sometimes it's amazing just how little personality he really has and how much he just really is a blank slate that they hope that the viewer is going to put whatever traits that they have onto him. But I think that he does a great job nonetheless, and in some ways that's harder to be able to, with so little to work with, actually create a compelling character that you like and root for. I do think it's amazing that every young adult sci-fi adaptation I've seen, and the books themselves, I've read some of the books, and the way they describe them in the books is just the main character is always very quiet, not a lot of emotions, and I think it's interesting, it might be because they figure the people that are reading these dystopian sci-fis, they're more likely to be a little more introverted and maybe not identify more with a more colorful life of the party character. And I think all the actors did a really good job. In particular, Teresa, the actress that played her, I think she gave a great performance. Reminded me a lot of Kristen Stewart, and I mean that in the best possible way. And then Aidan Gillen, he's Littlefinger, that's how everyone knows him. I have mixed feelings when I see him here just because he's so great on Game of Thrones. It was one of my favorite characters. I can't help but somewhat compare whatever performance he gives here and just find it a little lackluster and disappointing, but nonetheless, it's good to see him. And then Barry Pepper's in this, legendary actor, Green Mile, Saving Private Ryan. True Grit, I think I liked him most in 25th Hour. He's this coked out Wall Street guy in that. He's great. I wish he was in it more. That would be maybe one of my few complaints with the film. He's just a bit underutilized. And then same with, forget the actor's name, he plays Gustavo Fring on Breaking Bad. He was a big part of the second one. I feel like he took slightly less of a role in this one, and you do miss him a bit. And look, the same criticisms that apply to the first two movies apply to this one. The dialogue, it's very forgettable, very weak. They don't really explore the interesting moral questions in any particular depth. But I think if you go into this movie having watched the other two, you're going to find it's a pretty satisfying conclusion. I won't spoil the ending, obviously, but I think that the ending and what they end up doing with it is actually pretty satisfying in a way that I think it's harder than you'd think to pull off a satisfying finale to a conclusion, no matter how good or bad the series is, to really nail the landing and stick the final movie. I think it's tough, and I think they did it in this one, so I got to give it props for that. And now I want to talk about the morality of Maze Runner a bit, because I think it's interesting. It's basically anti-utilitarianism. So there's this idea, is it ever okay to kill one person to save millions of others, maybe, or thousands or hundreds? And there's two interesting points where you have to draw the line. So at what point, is there ever a point where you keep increasing the amount of people where it becomes okay? If you said, is it okay to kill one person to save three? I think almost everyone would say, no, that's never okay. What, you're crazy? But if you go, was it okay to kill one person to save a billion? The fundamental philosophy and the fundamental principles haven't changed, but I think now a lot more people might start to change their view. And it's interesting to think, does change, like, if you admit that, okay, a billion's fine, but three's not, well then at what point does it become okay? So it's just this kind of paradox. And then there's another spectrum where, well, okay, killing's wrong, but is it okay to lightly shove someone to save a million? And you would say, of course it is. But where is that line from lightly shoving to killing? And here, the line they try to draw is experimenting on people and putting fear into people without their consent. And they seem to draw that line, well, no, that's not okay as well. So you can't kill, can't experiment on people, and like, where is the point where you're infringing on someone's rights in a way that no amount of good to other people is going to justify it? And there's an interesting thought experiment. What if in this dystopian world where there's this virus destroying the world, there's one person that's immune and they want to harvest his blood to cure people? And he says, well, no, I don't really like needles, so I'm not going to do that. Well, most people would say he's the biggest jerk. It goes beyond jerk. Most people would say that's evil for you to say, well, just because you don't want to get a prick and get some needles, you're going to doom the whole world to extinction. What if, rather than extracting some blood, they have to put him in this simulation, cause him some fear, and then extract his blood? And he says, well, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through a simulation that's going to be scary. Again, most people would look at him and say, well, that's the most selfish thing, if not, again, drifting into that evil territory. So what's the difference between that scenario and this? Well, in this scenario, you've just changed it where now they're forcing, but it's just interesting. Fundamentally, it's the same, but now as soon as they're forcing the person to do it, it completely switches, and now most people watching and observing are going to judge for the person to not have to go through that thing. And then there's this wrinkle that, well, in the thought experiment I set up, I said it would guaranteed to save the world. What if it wasn't? What if there was a 20% chance, a 30% chance, or a 5% chance? Does that change things at all? And in this movie, at one point, a character says there is no cure, like, as kind of a rebuttal to her saying, look, we need to experiment on people to find the cure. He's like, look, there is no cure, so you're just experimenting for nothing. So in this movie, another wrinkle is the fact that the people putting the kids through this, they're doing it on a hope that potentially it's going to help things, but there is no guarantee. And it's interesting to think, why is Thomas so opposed to Wicked? Is it because he believes in the sanctity of the body and the freedom of the individual and all these abstract moral principles? Or is it just because all the friends he has in the world, the people he feels close to, he just wants to prevent them from pain and prevent them from going through something they don't want to go through, and he hates Wicked so much because of what they've done to his friends, rather than any kind of philosophical position? And does it matter which one of those he falls into and why he's opposing Wicked? Is it more noble if he's doing it for these abstract reasons, or is it more noble if he's doing it to protect his friends? I think that's an interesting idea as well. And then there's one more interesting wrinkle that sometimes gets hinted at. What if there was a virus that was targeting your entire massive extended family? So your grandparents, your parents, your siblings, your wife, and your kids, and they're all about to die from this virus and it's destroying them, and you have to force this person that you don't really know into this experiment in order to save your entire family. Is that a moral thing? And I do think that different people have different moral fundamental values and core beliefs. And I think that this thought experiment exposes that. And I think that you're going to get a pretty even split. Some people are going to say, well, no, like abstract moral principles, you can't ever infringe on the rights of one person for other people, no matter how many people you save or how close those people that are targeted are to you. But then other people are going to look at it and say, what kind of horrible, weak mentality is that you're going to doom all your loved ones to suffering, people you care about, people you're sworn to protect, for someone you don't even know? So, and again, I don't think there's an easy answer. I think it's just one of those issues that kind of exposes that humanity is not always unified in what we believe morally.